I never thought my own family would burn down everything I'd worked for. But when they demanded I give half of my life's work to my brother Brandon, and I said no, they showed me exactly who they really were. What happened next in that courtroom would shake our entire city and reveal a 20-year secret that changed everything. Growing up in the Mitchell household, I learned early that success came with a price, and that price was always sharing it with Brandon. My parents, Robert and Patricia Mitchell, had this unspoken rule that whatever Sarah achieved belonged to the family, but whatever Brandon needed was Sarah's responsibility to provide. I remember the exact moment I realized I was different from other families. I was 12, sitting at our dinner table after bringing home another perfect report card. While my parents smiled and nodded at my straight A's, Brandon sulked in his chair, his own report card showing mostly C's and D's hidden in his backpack. "Sarah, honey," my mother said, cutting into her meatloaf without looking up, "you know Brandon's having trouble with math. Maybe you could help him with his homework more often." It wasn't a question. It never was. My father cleared his throat, the sound that always preceded his pronouncements. "A family shares their gifts, Sarah. Your intelligence is a blessing that should lift everyone up." I nodded like the good daughter I was, but something twisted in my stomach. Why wasn't Brandon expected to try harder? Why was his failure automatically my responsibility? Years passed, and the pattern only deepened. When I got into architecture school on a full scholarship, the celebration dinner somehow became about how Brandon might follow in my footsteps if he could just get his grades up, if he could just find his direction, if his sister could just help him more. Sarah's always been the responsible one, my mother would tell relatives, her voice carrying that familiar mix of pride and expectation. She knows family comes first. During college, I worked 3 part-time jobs while maintaining my GPA. Every month, like clockwork, came the phone calls. Brandon needed money for rent. Brandon's car broke down. Brandon was between jobs again. Each time, my parents' voices carried that gentle manipulation I'd grown up with. "He's trying his best, honey. You know how hard it is for him to find his way when everything comes so easily to you." The guilt always worked. I'd send the money, tightening my own budget, eating ramen for weeks while Brandon posted photos of himself at expensive restaurants on social media. After graduation, I started small, a tiny architecture firm specializing in residential renovations. 18-hour days, endless client meetings, bidding on projects that barely covered expenses. But slowly, gradually, my business grew. My first real success came with the Henderson project, a complete renovation of a historic Victorian home that won a local design award. The local paper featured my work, and suddenly, my phone was ringing with new opportunities. That night, I called my parents to share the good news. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful!" my mother exclaimed. "You know, Brandon was just saying how he's thinking about buying a house. With your success, maybe you could help him with the down payment?" The celebration lasted exactly 30 seconds. "Mom, I just wanted to share my accomplishment." "And we're so proud, dear. But success means nothing if we don't lift up those we love. Brandon's been looking at this lovely place in Oakview. Nothing fancy, just a starter home. $20,000 for the down payment." My father's voice joined in from the extension. "Sarah, your brother needs stability. A home gives a man purpose. You've been blessed with success. Now it's time to bless others." I ended the call promising to think about it, but the joy of my achievement felt hollow. Why couldn't they just be proud of me for 5 minutes? Why did every conversation become about what I could do for Brandon? The requests escalated as my business grew. Not just down payments now, but car payments, credit card debts, temporary loans that were never repaid. My parents had perfected the art of making generosity feel mandatory. Family takes care of family, Sarah. Blood is thicker than water. You wouldn't want Brandon to struggle when you have so much. The emotional manipulation was surgical in its precision. They'd start with gratitude, how proud they were of my success, how blessed the family was to have someone so capable. Then came the gentle reminder of family obligations, followed by Brandon's specific need, and finally the subtle implication that refusing would make me selfish, ungrateful, a bad daughter. I found myself lying awake at nights calculating, If I gave Brandon the car payment, I'd have to push back hiring the assistant I desperately needed. If I covered his rent again, I'd delay upgrading my office equipment. My success was becoming their subsidy, and I was drowning in the weight of their expectations. The breaking point should have come earlier, but I was too conditioned to recognize it for what it was. When Brandon announced he wanted to start his own landscaping business, I hoped, this might be his chance to finally stand on his own feet. "It's a great opportunity," my father explained during one of our increasingly tense family dinners. "Brandon's always been good with his hands, just needed to find the right direction." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "He's already lined up 3 potential clients. All he needs is the startup capital." "How much?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. "$75,000, Brandon said, speaking directly to me for the first time all evening. "Equipment, truck, initial supplies. It's an investment in our family's future." $75,000, my entire business savings account. "Brandon," I said carefully, that's everything I've saved for the next phase of my business expansion." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Sarah," my mother's voice carried that familiar, disappointed tone. "Success isn't about hoarding money. It's about using our blessings to help those we love." "I'm not hoarding," I protested. "I've been planning this expansion for 2 years. I've already put down deposits on new office space, hired contractors." "Plans can change," my father interrupted. "Family is permanent. Your brother needs this opportunity." "What about my opportunities? What about my plans?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Brandon leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Come on, Sarah. You'll make it back in 6 months. Money just flows to you naturally. Some of us have to work harder for success." Work harder? I thought about my 18-hour days, my weekends spent on job sites, my social life sacrificed at the altar of building something meaningful. When had Brandon ever worked 18 hours at anything? "I need time to think about it," I said. That's when the campaign began in earnest. Daily phone calls from my mother, sharing updates about Brandon's depression over not being able to start his business. Text messages from my father with Bible verses about generosity and family obligations. Brandon himself sent me articles about successful business partnerships between siblings, each one carefully highlighting how family support led to greater success for everyone. The extended family got involved too. Aunts and uncles who'd barely spoken to me in years suddenly called to share how proud they were of my success and how wonderful it would be to see Brandon get his chance too. Cousins posted on social media about the importance of family support and lifting each other up. I was surrounded, suffocated by the collective pressure of people who'd never asked what I wanted, what I needed, what my dreams looked like beyond how they could benefit Brandon. The worst part was the doubt they planted. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe successful people did have an obligation to share their good fortune. Maybe this was what family really meant, and I was too focused on my own ambitions to see the bigger picture. I sought advice from my business mentor, Janet Rodriguez, a successful architect who'd built her own firm from scratch. "Sarah," she said, leaning back in her office chair, "let me ask you something. If Brandon had $75,000 and you needed it to save your business from bankruptcy, would he give it to you?" I opened my mouth to say yes, then stopped. Would he? I couldn't remember a single instance of Brandon sacrificing anything for me. Even as children, I'd shared my toys, my snacks, my everything, while Brandon guarded his possessions fiercely. "I don't know," I admitted. "That tells you everything you need to know," Janet said gently. "Real family support goes both ways. What you're describing sounds more like emotional taxation." Emotional taxation. The phrase hit me like a physical blow because it fit so perfectly. I wasn't a daughter in this family. I was a resource to be managed and depleted. That night, I made my decision. The family dinner where I announced my refusal will be burned into my memory forever. My parents had prepared Brandon's favorite meal, lasagna, garlic bread, the works. The dining room table was set with the good china as if we were celebrating something special. "So," my mother said as she served the lasagna, "have you thought about Brandon's business opportunity?" "I have," I said, setting down my fork, And I've decided I can't provide the funding." The silence was deafening. "Can't?" my father repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Or won't?" "Won't," I said, feeling my heart pound. "I need that money for my own business expansion. I've worked 5 years to save it, and I have specific plans for its use." Brandon's face flushed red. "Are you serious right now? After everything this family has done for you? What has this family done for me, Brandon? I paid for my own education, built my own business, earned my own success. What exactly have you done for me?" "We gave you love, support, encouragement," my mother said, her voice rising. "We believed in you when you were just a little girl with big dreams. And then you turned that success into an obligation to fund everyone else's dreams," I shot back. "When do I get to just be your daughter instead of your personal bank account?" My father stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped against the floor. "That's enough. You're being selfish and ungrateful. We raised you better than this. You raised me to believe my worth was tied to what I could provide for Brandon," I said, standing too. "Well, I'm done providing." "If that's how you really feel," my mother said, her voice cold as ice, "then maybe you should think about whether you want to be part of this family at all." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Choose Brandon's dreams or lose your family. It wasn't really a choice, it was an ultimatum designed to force my compliance. "Maybe I should," I whispered. I left that night with their disappointed faces burning in my memory and their voices echoing in my ears. Selfish, ungrateful, not the daughter they raised. But for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never experienced in that house: relief. The next 3 weeks were blissfully quiet. No phone calls demanding money, no guilt trips about family obligations, no texts with emotional manipulation disguised as concern. I threw myself into my work, finally moving forward with the business expansion I'd planned for so long. I should have known the silence wouldn't last. I was working late in my home office, reviewing blueprints for a major commercial project, when I smelled smoke. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor was having a barbecue, but the smell grew stronger, more acrid. Racing to my front window, I saw orange flames licking at the corner of my house. My beautiful craftsman bungalow, the first home I'd ever owned, the place I'd renovated with my own hands, the symbol of everything I'd achieved, was on fire. I called 911, grabbed my laptop and important documents, and ran outside as flames spread across the roof I'd personally helped reshingle just 6 months earlier. The fire department arrived quickly, but not quickly enough. By the time they contained the blaze, half my house was destroyed. The living room where I'd hosted my first client meetings, the kitchen where I'd celebrated every business milestone, the bedroom where I'd dreamed of my future, all of it reduced to charred wood and ash. As I stood watching the firefighters douse the remaining flames, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Brandon. "Heard about the fire. Guess you should have prioritized family when you had the chance." My blood turned to ice. I screenshot the message, then called the fire investigator over. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm sorry, but this doesn't look accidental. Someone deliberately set this fire. Do you have any idea who might want to hurt you?" I stared at my phone screen, at Brandon's message with its damning fire emoji, and felt something inside me break completely. Not break like sadness or despair. Break like the final chain snapping free. "Yes," I said quietly. "I know exactly who did this." The next morning, I sat in the small hotel room that had become my temporary home, staring at the insurance paperwork spread across the bed. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, reduced to a claim number and an investigation file. But Brandon's text message sat in my phone like a confession, and suddenly I realized something my family had never counted on. I wasn't the scared little girl who would take their abuse and manipulation silently anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Anderson and Associates Legal Services." The receptionist answered. "I need to speak with James Anderson," I said. "I need to sue my family." The law office of James Anderson was nothing like I expected. Instead of intimidating mahogany and leather, it felt warm and welcoming. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and walls lined with books that actually looked read. When James walked in, he wasn't the slick corporate lawyer I'd imagined either. Mid-40s, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a handshake that somehow conveyed both strength and compassion. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, settling across from me with a legal pad. "Tell me what happened." For the first time since the fire, I told my story from the beginning. Not just the burning house, but the years of financial manipulation, the emotional blackmail, the systematic way my family had trained me to believe my success belonged to them. James listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah," he said finally, "what you're describing isn't just family dysfunction. It's financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and now criminal destruction of property. Have you ever heard the term financial narcissism?" I shook my head. It's when family members view one person as an extension of themselves, existing solely to meet their needs. The successful child becomes a resource to be exploited, not a person to be loved unconditionally. He leaned forward. "Nothing you've described is normal family behavior." The validation hit me like a physical force. After years of being told I was selfish, ungrateful, and wrong, hearing a professional confirm that my family's treatment was abusive felt like breathing clean air after being underwater. "What's our next step?" I asked. "First, we document everything. Every text, email, financial transaction. Then we file both civil and criminal charges. The fire is arson. That's a felony. The years of financial coercion may qualify as extortion. And we're going to sue for damages, both financial and emotional." Over the next month, I became a detective of my own life. I printed bank statements showing years of transfers to Brandon, over $200,000 in total. I compiled text messages, emails, and voicemails filled with guilt trips and manipulation. I documented every instance of emotional blackmail, every threat of family abandonment used to extract money from me. The hardest part was reliving it all. Seeing the pattern laid out in black and white made me realize how thoroughly I'd been conditioned to accept abuse as love. How many times had I apologized for succeeding? How many times had I minimized my own achievements to make Brandon feel better about his failures? During this process, I also started therapy with Dr. Rebecca Chen, a specialist in family trauma. Our first session was eye-opening. "Sarah," she said, "describe your role in your family." "I'm the responsible one, the achiever, the one who helps everyone." "And what's Brandon's role?" I paused. He needs help. He's the one who struggles." "Who assigned these roles?" I don't know. They just always existed." Dr. Chen nodded. "Family systems often create fixed roles that serve the dysfunction. You were cast as the giver, Brandon as the taker, and your parents as the enforcers of this dynamic. You never had permission to be anything else." Week by week, session by session, I began to understand how deeply the manipulation ran. My parents hadn't just asked for money. They'd systematically destroyed my ability to say no. They'd conditioned me to feel guilt for my success, to believe that love was conditional on my usefulness to Brandon. "Real love," Dr. Chen told me, "doesn't come with a price tag. Real family celebrates your success without immediately calculating how they can benefit from it." Meanwhile, James was building our case methodically. He hired a fire investigator who confirmed accelerant had been used. Security cameras from a neighboring business showed Brandon's truck in my neighborhood 20 minutes before the fire started. Phone records revealed that my parents had been in contact with Brandon immediately before and after the fire. We have them," James told me during one of our weekly meetings. "The evidence is overwhelming." But the most shocking discovery came when James decided to dig deeper into my family's financial history. "I always recommend a thorough background check in family financial abuse cases," he explained. "Sometimes there are patterns we haven't discovered yet." What he found changed everything. I was in my temporary apartment reviewing client proposals when James called with urgency in his voice. "Sarah, I need you to come to my office immediately. There's something you need to see." An hour later, I sat in his conference room staring at a manila folder that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. 23 years ago, James said carefully, Your parents filed a paternity suit against someone named David Hartford. It was sealed by the court, but my investigator has connections. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were court documents, DNA test results, and correspondence between lawyers. Brandon wasn't my father's biological son. According to the documents, my mother had an affair when I was 7 years old. When Brandon was born, my father suspected and demanded a paternity test. The results showed David Hartford, my mother's former co-worker, was Brandon's real father. But here's where it got twisted. Instead of divorcing my mother or confronting the truth, my parents had sued David Hartford for child support. They'd essentially blackmailed him into paying monthly support for Brandon's entire childhood, money they'd used while making me feel obligated to provide even more. There's more, James said quietly. David Hartford is a successful real estate developer. He's been paying $2,500 a month for Brandon's support, plus college tuition, plus a trust fund that Brandon gets access to when he turns 35. I stared at the papers, my mind reeling. Brandon turns 35 next month. Exactly. He's about to inherit $400,000 from his biological father's trust fund. The room spun around me. All these years, all the guilt, all the financial manipulation, and Brandon was about to inherit nearly $500,000. My parents had known this his entire life. They'd made me sacrifice my dreams to fund someone who was secretly wealthy. They knew, I whispered. They always knew he didn't need my money. Sarah, James said gently, this changes our entire case. What your family did wasn't just abuse. It was fraud. The next week, we filed our lawsuit. Not just for the fire damages, but for decades of financial fraud and emotional manipulation. The local newspaper picked up the story. Local architect sues family after house fire, reveals 20-year secret. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone rang constantly with reporters wanting interviews. My business clients called to express support. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out to share their own stories of family financial abuse. But the most shocking response came from David Hartford himself. He appeared at my lawyer's office 3 days after the story broke, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and an expensive suit. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "I've been wanting to meet you for 23 years. We sat in James's conference room while David told his story. He'd loved my mother, had planned to leave his wife for her. When she became pregnant, he was thrilled. But when my father discovered the affair, everything changed. They used Brandon as a weapon, David explained. Either I paid support and stayed away, or they'd destroy my marriage and my business with a public scandal. I chose to pay. But the trust fund, I said. Why didn't you tell Brandon the truth? David's face crumpled. I wanted to. Every month when I sent that check, I wondered about my son. But your parents made it clear. Any contact with Brandon would result in them exposing everything. They held my reputation hostage. He pulled out a thick envelope. These are letters I wrote to Brandon every year on his birthday, 23 years' worth of letters I could never send. I thought about Brandon, about the resentment he'd carried his whole life, believing his father didn't love him enough to provide for him. All while his real father had been loving him from a distance, sending money and letters that never reached him. There's something else, David said. The trust fund matures next week. I'd planned to finally tell Brandon the truth then, to give him the choice of having a relationship with me. What will you do now? James asked. Now that the truth is coming out anyway, I'm going to tell my son who I am, and I'm going to help Sarah get justice for what was done to her. 2 weeks later, we stood in the courthouse waiting for our case to be called. I wore my best suit, navy blue, professional, a reminder to myself and everyone else that I was a successful businesswoman who deserved respect. My parents arrived with their lawyer, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Brandon came separately, his face a mask of confusion and anger. The trust fund revelation had hit him hard, according to the rumors circulating through our small town. Judge Catherine Thompson presided, a woman in her 60s known for her no-nonsense approach to family law and her particular distaste for financial manipulation cases. This is an unusual case, Judge Thompson began, reviewing the files. We have criminal arson charges, civil damages for financial fraud, and a paternity revelation that spans over 2 decades. Mr. Anderson, present your case." For the next 3 hours, James methodically laid out the evidence. Bank records showing $200,000 in transfers from me to Brandon. Text messages filled with emotional manipulation. The fire investigation proving arson. And finally, the bombshell evidence of the secret paternity and trust fund. When he played the recording of Brandon's post-fire text message with the fire emoji, the courtroom gasped audibly. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that family financial support was normal, that the fire was coincidental, that the paternity issue was irrelevant to the current charges. Judge Thompson was not impressed. "Mr. Davidson," she said to their lawyer, "are you seriously arguing that extorting money from one child to support another child who was secretly receiving substantial support from his biological father constitutes normal family behavior?" The lawyer had no good answer. Then came the moment that would be replayed on local news for weeks. Judge Thompson looked directly at my parents. "In 40 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such calculated long-term financial abuse disguised as family obligation. You turned your daughter into a personal ATM while hiding the fact that your son had another source of substantial income." She turned to Brandon. "And you, Mr. Mitchell, or should I say Mr. Hartford, not only participated in this financial manipulation, but escalated it to arson when your sister finally set appropriate boundaries." The courtroom was dead silent. "Therefore," Judge Thompson continued, "I am awarding Ms. Sarah Mitchell full damages for the fire, $350,000. Additionally, I am ordering the defendants to repay every dollar they fraudulently obtained from her over the past 10 years, with interest, $267,000. The gasps from the gallery were audible, but Judge Thompson wasn't finished. "But there's more." She pulled out a sealed envelope. "This morning, I received additional evidence that changes the scope of this case entirely." She opened the envelope and held up official-looking documents. 23 years ago, David Hartford established a trust fund for his biological son, Brandon Hartford. That trust fund, which matures today, contains not the $400,000 reported in the media, but $1.2 million. The courtroom erupted. Brandon's face went white. My parents looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Furthermore, Judge Thompson's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Hartford has provided evidence that the defendants have been receiving monthly support payments of $2,500 for 23 years, over $690,000 in total, while simultaneously manipulating their daughter into providing additional support." She looked directly at my parents. "You have been living off 2 children while contributing nothing yourselves. This is not family support, this is systematic financial parasitism." Judge Thompson set down her gavel. "I am also ordering a full criminal investigation into potential charges of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. The fire investigation will proceed separately." As the courtroom erupted in chaos, I sat in stunned silence. It was over, not just the case, but the 28 years of conditioning that had made me believe I owed my family my success. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. David Hartford was there, and for the first time in 23 years, he publicly embraced his son Brandon. It was awkward and emotional and painful, but it was real. Brandon approached me hesitantly. "Sarah," he said, I didn't know about the money, about David. I thought—" "You thought what, Brandon? That burning down my house was an appropriate response to me setting boundaries?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "I was angry. I felt like you were abandoning the family." "I was abandoning the dysfunction," I corrected. "There's a difference." 3 months later, I stood in the shell of my rebuilt house. Bigger this time, better designed, paid for entirely with the settlement money. My new architecture firm was thriving, with clients who respected my talent rather than viewing me as a resource to be exploited. Dr. Chen had helped me understand that healing wasn't about forgiveness. It was about truth. The truth that love doesn't require financial sacrifice. The truth that family isn't defined by blood, but by respect and genuine care. The truth that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was healthy. David Hartford had become an unexpected ally, sharing his own story of being manipulated and controlled by people who were supposed to love him. Brandon was slowly building a relationship with his biological father, finally understanding where his feelings of abandonment had really come from. My parents had moved to another state, their reputation in our community permanently damaged. The criminal charges were still pending, but they'd already lost what mattered most to them, their carefully constructed facade of being a loving, supportive family. I'd lost a family, but I'd gained something more valuable: myself. 6 months after the trial, I established the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Family Financial Abuse Survivors. Using part of my settlement money, we provide legal aid and therapy for people trapped in similar situations, those who've been conditioned to believe their success belongs to their family rather than themselves. The foundation's first client was a young man whose siblings expected him to fund their lifestyles because he'd become a successful engineer. His story sounded heartbreakingly familiar, but this time I was in a position to help rather than just survive. Standing in my new home office, looking at the framed newspaper article about our court victory, I realized something profound. The best revenge wasn't destroying my family. It was building a life so authentic and fulfilling that their opinions no longer mattered. They'd tried to keep me small, controllable, guilty. Instead, they'd created someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than genuine love and respect. For the first time in my life, I was truly free, and that freedom wasn't just mine. It was something I could share with others still trapped in the golden cage of family obligation. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. Another potential client, another person ready to break free from financial manipulation disguised as family love. I answered with a smile. Sarah Mitchell Foundation. How can we help you reclaim your life? Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting revenge on those who hurt you. It's using that pain to prevent others from suffering the same way. Sometimes the best way to heal from family dysfunction is to create the kind of family you wished you'd always had, built on respect rather than obligation, love rather than manipulation. I'd lost the family I was born into, but I'd found something better: a chosen family of survivors, thrivers, and people who understood that real love never comes with a price tag.